Hey there, Kindred Spirits. You are listening to Kindred Spirits Book Club, the podcast where any number of women of a certain age geek out about Anne of Green Gables, and today there's three of us. Joining me today is my lovely co-host, Reagan Duffy, and one of our beloved guests from last season, Dr. Laura Robinson. Hi, Reagan. Hi, Laura.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Laura, we are so delighted to have you back again. Listeners, if you remember, Laura was on our episode last season titled Anne of Ingleside in Conversation. We met her at the Ella Montgomery conference in June of 2024, and we had the best time chatting with her last season. She gave us so much to think about when we were talking about Anne of Ingleside. We knew we had to bring her back to talk with us again when we got to Rilla of Ingleside. So as promised, we've brought Laura back, and let's give you a quick little refresher on her bona fides. Laura Robinson is a professor of English and Women's and Gender Studies at Acadia University in Nova Scotia. She's a former visiting scholar at the Ella Montgomery Institute at the University of Prince Edward Island, and she's now the chair of the Ella Montgomery Institute's Management Committee. She's published many articles on Montgomery's work, most recently on Netflix's Anne with an E in Ella Montgomery in Conversation about children and childhoods. With E. Holly Pike, she edited the volume Ella Montgomery and Gender. She acted as a consultant on Historica Canada's Ella Montgomery Heritage Minute and the Inspiring Places, Ella Montgomery Literary Tour in PEI. And she curated a multimedia exhibit that traveled internationally over the 4-year centenary of the Great War, entitled The Canadian Homefront, Ella Montgomery's Reflection on the First World War. So, of course, we had to have her come talk to us when we got to Rilla. She's also the consulting editor for the Journal of Ella Montgomery Studies. So that's a lot of amazing expertise. But Laura, besides that resume, what else should our listeners know about you?
Well, I think one of the coolest things is that I live in the beautiful Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia, right on the top of the North Mountain with a view of almost the entire valley from the Minas Basin on one side, almost right down to the other end. That's not true because the valley's quite long, but it's really spectacular up here. Sometimes you see the eagles flying beneath us and it's just really something else.
That sounds absolutely incredible. Are you a Nova Scotia native or did you come there later in life?
That's a great question. Given our topic today of war and military, I grew up in the military, so I moved all over. I lived in Arizona as a child. I lived in Germany and in many places in Canada, but my parents are originally from Nova Scotia, and so we always called Nova Scotia home. So we came home in most summers, a lot of summers. And then I went to Acadia, where I am now a professor for my undergrad because it was close to family. So yeah, interesting.
I love that. All the places you've been in Nova Scotia is still home.
And it really feels like home, which is nice because I never had a feeling of home before and just thought, I don't have a home, that's okay. But when I moved back here in 2019, I was the Dean of Arts at Acadia. Suddenly I thought, oh, this is home. I do have roots here. I have people here. It hadn't occurred to me that I actually did have a home.
Oh, I love that idea of coming back to a place and realizing this is actually it. Kind of almost not realizing what you had until you revisited it. And then we're like, oh, okay. Yeah, I relate to that very much. That's lovely. All right, so before we get started, a quick reminder that if you are not already hanging out with us on Instagram, come join us. We are at kindredspirits.bookclub, and that is where we share updates, giveaways, cozy bookish memes, and lots of glimpses of our Ella Montgomery shelves. We also love chatting with our listeners in the DMs. It feels just like an extension of book club. And while you're at it, if you've been enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to rate and review us. Whether you are listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, wherever, your reviews really help other Montgomery fans discover the show. Reviews are how podcasts survive. And our kindred spirit of the episode today is Rilla. We are going to talk all about how Rilla grows and matures throughout Rilla of Ingleside. We love how she never loses her core self, but she's continually challenging herself in this book to become a better person, to continue to grow in her morality, and she's making these hard choices and recommitting over and over again. Our quote of the episode comes from the moment when Irene Howard tells Rilla that Walter has enlisted right in the middle of their Red Cross concert. Rilla is stunned and she's contemplating ditching the concert and running off to hide her pain. She thinks, Was it a coward's part to run away like this? The question came to her suddenly, as if someone else had asked it. She thought of the shambles of the Flanders front. She thought of her brother and her playmate helping to hold those fire-swept trenches. What would they think of her if she shirked her little duty here, the humble duty of carrying the program through for her Red Cross? But she couldn't stay. She couldn't. Yet, what was it Mother had said when Jem went? When our women fail in courage, shall our men be fearless still? But this was unbearable. Still, she stopped halfway to the door and went back to the window. I must stay here and see things through, said Rilla, clasping her cold hands together.
Oh, Rilla, she's so brave, and Irene is so mean.
Well, before we launch into our story club, Laura, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with Rilla of Ingleside, because you know a lot.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, one of the things I did was create a bilingual curated exhibit on the First World War called the Canadian Home Front, Ella Montgomery's Reflections on the First World War. And so it was a multimedia exhibit, but physical. So there was a film played that was a film from World War One. I got a tailor who specializes in Montgomery recreations to create Susan Baker's dress that she kilts up to work in the fields.
I love
and
it.
And then I had a bunch of panels, the big zip panels. And so I drew mostly from Rilla, but also from Montgomery's journals. And I did newspaper clippings from the time and photographs. And it traveled to 3 countries and was in about 14 distinct locations over the 4-year centenary of the First World War. It was a lot of carrying stuff around. and I've published a couple of articles on Rilla, one on the home as battleground, and the other one I compared the representation of the masculine ideal in wartime in Louisa May Alcott's Little Women and Montgomery's Rilla in Ingleside.
Oh, that is completely fascinating, right? Because, of course, Little Women has that sort of similar through line with Rilla, where the war is happening. It's off the page, but it is happening. And it's kind of this thing that's looming over the lives of all the characters in the book.
And it's interesting because I think both writers sort of center then the fact that women are also battling and such a part of the war, and war becomes almost like a metaphor to some degree as well for what's going on in their lives. So I think, it is such a powerful image in both of those books, the image of war and the actual war, because there is that, but then just how each author sort of deals with the war and women's role in it.
Well, and I think it's interesting, both of them have this kind of theme of difficulty of having to be the one who is waiting, the terribleness of the waiting, the terribleness of having to have the people you love most in danger and not being able to directly act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because they're forced into a lot of domestic chores, right? More than they would be otherwise in domestic duties. And I mean, Alcott actually did go off to the Civil War. So it's interesting that she doesn't allow her character to do so. I mean, so that's a choice because she's really focusing on the domestic realm.
I think that's really interesting. We're going to get to this, I think, a little later as well. What even are some of the options available to women in wartime, right? This is something that Rilla confronts really directly. And it's just interesting to think about how Louisa May Alcott was treating that in Little Women. And what you see here, I think in Rilla, it just seems so limited what their options are. But then, and it's almost like, I don't want to say it's a throwaway line, but you're reading the book and all of a sudden you find out that Faith joined the Red Cross, became a nurse, and is in London. Wait a second, Faith, I want to read Faith's book. Like, what is she getting to do while meanwhile Rilla is home, like throwing concerts and sewing sheets?
Yeah, and, I think there's quite a few moments where we see that other girls and young women are doing more active things, and Rilla just can't. She can't because of her social class. She's the doctor's daughter. She shouldn't go out into the field, but she can work in the store. The other ones are brave, and that's what Rilla's word. They go off and do these things. So there are options. Montgomery is very much making the decision to keep this character in the domestic realm.
As you see, this conversation is already going to be so much fun. So I'm just going to really quick let our listeners in on our topic for today for our story club. We're going to finish up sort of our trio of episodes on Rilla Blythe's character arc. We have been framing this with our favorite Anne of Green Gables quote. And this is when Anne asks Matthew, would you rather be divinely beautiful, dazzlingly clever, or angelically good? So in 2 episodes ago, we talked about how Rilla and Anne are like almost opposites when we look around their sort of growth arcs when it comes to this notion of beauty and romance. While young Anne needed to learn that she's beautiful and worthy of romance, Rilla, who knows she's beautiful, needs to learn that she's more than just beautiful. A lot of Anne's obstacles to romance were sort of her own internal beliefs about ideal romances and who deserves to have them. And Rilla's obstacle is this huge war. It doesn't matter how beautiful and charming you are when all the young men are off at war. In our last episode, we discussed how Rilla and Anne sort of approach that value of cleverness differently. Anne really used an academic focus in her cleverness, and she used that to prove her worthiness to Marilla and Matthew, to Gilbert, and even to herself. Rilla doesn't want any of it. She's convinced she's not clever, and a lot of her growth arc throughout this book is to sort of understand the ways she is competent and capable, and to grow her own intelligence and wisdom, even when that shows up differently, right? It's not necessarily academic intelligence, but it's organizational intelligence and social intelligence. But I have to say, and this is why I'm so excited for this conversation, Rilla's most profound area of growth is in her goodness. And by goodness, we're going to sort of be talking about her overall morality, her community mindedness, and her care and concern for those outside of herself. So she grows leaps and bounds over the course of the war, and that growth arc is going to anchor our conversation today.
We've talked pretty extensively already about the fact that the Rilla at the beginning of the book is not quite 15 years old. And she's frivolous, a little self-absorbed, a little spoiled. She's no academic ambition, no interest in learning housekeeping, and is generally content just to be young and pretty and have no responsibilities or cares other than if anyone will dance with her at the party. Her biggest worry is that her older brother Walter doesn't confide in her as much as he does with her older sister Di. And we see at the beginning that as the threat of war looms uncertainly over the adults of Ingleside, that Rilla's primarily worried about what dress she will wear to the lighthouse party. And some of that we're going to chalk right up to her age and developmental stage. A little self-involvement and disinterest in foreign affairs would be pretty typical for a newly 15-year-old kid. And while Miss Oliver calls her incorrigible 15, she also wants Rilla to have a joyful, uncomplicated girlhood in comparison to what she reports was her own awkward and difficult one. Rilla shares with Miss Oliver her terrible dream of realizing she went to the dance in her robe and bedroom shoes, and she woke up with a gasp of horror. And then Miss Oliver shares her awful premonition of a dream of seeing waves swallow up the village and realizing that the waves are soaking her dress in blood. Miss Oliver fears that this portends war, and Rilla worries that it could mean that a storm might cancel the party.
So that's where Rilla's priorities are.
And we're being asked to make this direct comparison here, right as we are on the brink of war. Rilla is a little shallow, flighty, protected, and although she does have a frank humor about herself and a sweetness that make her very likable, we also want Rilla to have a wonderful time at her first party. When the news of the war comes, it interrupts the party and Rilla's romantic moment with Ken Ford, and the party is spoiled for Rilla. First, because Ken's interest leaves her and focuses on the war, and then because Rilla realizes that it's possible her brothers might also go. This is the moment that Rilla has to start to grow up too quickly. So we've got that Jem Blythe and Jerry Meredith enlist in the army right away. And it seems like everyone in Four Winds and Glen St. Mary is looking for a way to assist in the war effort. Anne and Miss Cornelia start the Village Red Cross Society. Nan and Di are busy sewing sheets and bandages. Dr. Blythe and Mr. Meredith are founding a patriotic society. And Susan has vowed to become a heroine. Rilla is floundering at sea. She hates that the adults come over and sit on the porch at Ingleside and only discuss war. But she also seems to understand that this is a moment to step up and take action. Rilla writes in her diary, "Everybody seems to be busy but me. I wish there was something I could do, but there doesn't seem to be anything. Mother and Nan and Di are busy all the time, and I just wander about like a lonely ghost."
So yeah, Laura, connecting back to what we were talking about before, what was even available, right? What could they have been doing at this time? It seems like in this moment, everybody just sort of locks in and knows what to do. And then here's poor Rilla who's like, I just wanted to go to a party.
And I think there are options. I mean, many of the women in that time period would have gone out and worked the fields. They would have taken over local jobs that the men had to leave in order to go off to war. But none of that seems to be an option for Rilla. I mean, she ends up working in the store because that's the one that's the only socially acceptable one. There would have been some options, but not for Rilla. And that's what I think is interesting, because I think for Montgomery, she's creating a very ordinary girl here. And I mean that in the best way possible. In that she's not like Anne. She's not like Emily. She is not like Jo in Little Women. She's not a girl who's already different than other girls. She is just a girl who wants to have a quiet girl life and carry on. And then what we see is that's just not possible. So she becomes like a reluctant hero where she has to step up and do things that she really hates, which is interesting.
Absolutely right. Like Anne stepping into a leadership role in the wake of a war, we would expect nothing less. We know exactly the kind of heroine Anne is, but Rilla, is just a regular kid.
Well, we even can compare her to Faith Meredith, who at this moment is full of fire and already is saying she wishes she was a man and could go too. And you can see that if this book was from Faith Meredith's point of view, this would be an entirely different book. Faith wouldn't need to be put in positions to learn how to grow and sacrifice. She's already launched herself into it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that idea that Rilla is just a sweet, ordinary girl
who has to become extraordinary because it's wartime. I mean, that's kind of the message. Everyone, even Susan Baker, steps up and becomes heroic in this time period.
Yeah.
And I think the key, though, for me is this whole novel is about women's heroism. And I think that that's really such an important message from Montgomery. She is centering women and she is comparing them in the very quotation that you started with. She's comparing them directly to the soldiers on the front lines, showing that their life, while not the same, is equivalent because of the things that they have to do.
Thinking about women's heroism and the way that ordinary women had to step up also dovetails really nicely with one of Maud's recurring themes around community. And this idea that over the course of all the Anne books, so many of those plot arcs were about Anne finding her place in community. And in particular, we've discussed on the podcast how women create community in sewing circles and aid societies, how women sitting around on the porch and it's seemingly like idle gossip and chatter, but what it really is like sharing really important information about who is safe, who needs help, how can they support one another, how can they show up for each other. So it's like women who are living, especially in these small towns, especially in this time period, have sort of the groundwork laid already because they're living in community in these tight-knit communities this way to know how to step up. And this is all of a sudden Rilla is a young kid who hasn't had that opportunity to be involved in that way. Now it's her moment. I wonder, Laura, what you think about community just sort of as a theme. Why is that important to Maud?
Yeah, it's such an interesting perspective to take because you're right. Almost everything she writes is ultimately about finding a community. So I think it is a chronic theme for her about community and, how toxic it can be, but also how important and supportive it is. And I think your point about the women, it being perceived as idle gossip or something, and yet how important it is, I think that's also a steady drumbeat in all of Montgomery's work. I mean, it's also the masculinist way of looking down on what women are doing together and making light of it. Oh, it's just idle gossip. Well, it isn't. You're absolutely right. Women are sharing really important information, passing it on intergenerationally, and looking after each other in that moment, as Rilla does by helping Miranda get married. Right?
That's a great example.
It's really interesting how people perceive women's relationships with each other and women's activities in our traditionally masculinist society. Whatever it is women are doing is usually denigrated. And I think Montgomery is doing an amazing job of flipping that and pointing out that no, women are pretty darn heroic.
I love your example of Miranda Pryor's wedding and how Rilla sort of like threw that all together because it's Montgomery, it is played for laughs and it's this funny moment. But what is actually happening here is in a matter of hours, Rilla is taking the field like a little general and she's marshaling all of her troops and she's got everybody thrown into action. She has her mother and Susan making wedding food. She is making over her own dress so that way it'll fit Miranda. She's on the phone with the groom telling him, hey, go get a license. She does all of this with the sort of direction and leadership that you would expect from anyone on a battlefield. And so, yes, is it a wedding? And is it domestic? Is it this sort of like homely women's work? Sure, I guess. But look what she's actually capable of doing.
I was just going to say, it's that unpaid mental labor that our society runs on and that everyone tries to make invisible. I'm watching this amazing show right now called The Change, and it's about this woman who has kept track of all the labor she's done, all of it, and then said to her husband, until you pony up, I'm out of here. And then it starts a social movement where everyone starts keeping labor diaries. All the women start keeping labor diaries and refuse to continue to do this work. It's a riot if you want to see it.
I'm inspired, frankly.
I know. But what Montgomery is doing is showing how important this labor is and how normal domestic life wouldn't happen without it. I mean, she actually there's a short story that she wrote that was turned into a play, and it's The Strike at Putney. And it is about the women going on strike because the men don't think they do anything important, and suddenly the church can't function. It's a riot.
So thinking about this idea of here's Rilla, she's floundering, everybody knows exactly what to do. So it's kind of up to Anne to gently nudge Rilla to action. You know, she points out that the younger folks in town might get a little bit more out of like a junior Red Cross instead of hanging on the coattails of the adult Red Cross. And I think this is because that Anne knows from lived experience that the secret to making a difference and supporting a cause is to take action and getting a group of committed people together to do some good. She did it when she wasn't much older than Rilla with the Avonlea Village Improvement Society. But Rilla kind of balks. She's never done anything like this before. However, she resolves to be brave and unselfish, and I guess for her that means doing this thing, forming the Junior Reds, doing something she is not sure she can do. And we get this absolutely hysterical scene where Rilla is calmly sewing sheets, but she's mentally planning for the Junior Reds. She's thinking about who should lead the group, so she's kind of running down the list of all the girls. She's even thinking about whether or not they should have uniforms, because of course every teen girl loves an aesthetic. And then it's on her older sister Di to point out that she's actually sewn the top hem of one sheet to the bottom of another, which, you know, really I think reinforces for Rilla that her skills are best used running the Junior Reds as opposed to sewing. And I think this is an interesting turning point for Rilla, because it's not just this decision to be unselfish and brave, but also she's finding this new aptitude for running an organization. You know, as we discussed in our last episode, she's very clever when it comes to social savvy and executive function. But founding and running the Junior Reds, seeing this through, is an experience that's going to require Rilla's goodness. It's going to require Rilla's innate moral sense to expand. Because for once, Rilla is being asked to think outside of herself and see herself as part of a community rather than just one young girl.
So she learns how to put the needs of a group over her own ideas, to pick her battles. Like, she doesn't fight over the choice of treasurer, despite she says she despises Jen Vickers and she had nominated Una Meredith instead. She thinks, I wonder if Mother and Mrs. Elliot have problems in the senior society too. I suppose they have, but they just go on calmly in spite of everything. I go on, but not calmly. I rage and cry, but I do it all in private and blow off steam in this diary. And when it's over, I vow I'll show them. I never sulk. I detest people who sulk. Anyhow, we've got the society started and we're to meet once a week and we're all going to learn how to knit. I would suspect that Anne and Miss Cornelia have just as many problems in the senior society too.
Oh, undoubtedly, right? Age does not mean that we're any better running a group. Some other things that Rilla led the Junior Reds in doing was campaigning for contribution for victory loans, which I think is something that we're probably all familiar with on some level, right? This is where you sort of loan money to the government to finance the war. But they were also staging benefit concerts, giving patriotic recitations, and raising money for communities affected by the war, right? We're told that they were raising money for Belgians, right? For regular Belgian citizens. And they were also helping to recruit men to enlist. It's a lot. It's a lot for a group of teenage girls to be taking on. Rilla tells her diaries that there are times when I am so exasperated that I feel tempted to wash my hands of the whole affair. But after I dance around my room a few times in sheer rage, I cool down and have another whack at it. I love how expressive Rilla is. You can see when we're talking about Rilla and goodness, you can really see that this is like a struggle for her. This stuff is hard. She doesn't want to do it. She's not just so angelically good inherently that she can rise to this occasion. This is frustrating and it requires her to really dig in and do the thing. And she does. You know, her perseverance and follow through are really shining here, shining in this herding cats ability.
Well, and I think Rilla really compares herself to somebody like Una Meredith, who she perceives as somebody who's just naturally sweet and angelic about that, where she just kind of assumes that Una, she wouldn't get upset. She wouldn't lose her temper. Mm-hmm. She wouldn't get exasperated around some of those things. And the fact that she perceives as her flaws.
Yeah, why is Rilla holding herself to such a high standard here, right? It's not enough that she's doing it. She also has to do it with a smile and be perfectly graceful.
Well, Kelly, I think the answer is patriarchy, but...
But it's interesting because, I mean, Montgomery takes a different direction with her heroine in this novel, right? I mean, she doesn't necessarily show her heroines hating domestic labor as much as Rilla does. I mean, think about Jane of Lantern Hill, and even the other ones kind of enjoy it and just can't wait to do things in the house. And so it is really interesting that she focuses so much on how much Rilla hates to do all these things. I mean, the whole community part of the girls and probably this regular Red Cross making all the clothes is so interesting because, of course, clothes wouldn't have been made in the big factories in the same way they are now. So these women and girls were doing really important labor that, again, was sort of overlooked in a lot of ways. And so Montgomery drew really, I mean, people focused a lot on the women who went off and did unusual things, but the women who focused on mass producing the things they normally produced didn't get a lot of focus. So Montgomery's work here is really interesting. But I think the fact that she shows Rilla despising all of this is quite fascinating, especially because at the end of the novel, you know, war is over. The boys come home. Yes, they're changed, but the war is over for them. But everything that Rilla has learned to do in the course of this novel is what she's going to have to carry on doing. And I think that's quite a message. The war is not over for Rilla. She's going to have to keep doing the things that she despises, even though she learns that she's fairly good at it.
We were discussing some of that in our last episode, Laura, some of that same idea, which is like Ken comes home and it's supposed to be this big romantic reunion, but what actually is the rest of Rilla's life? Here she's found that she has this aptitude for leadership and organization. She's learned how to cook and sew better than she ever did before. And, well, turns out those are exactly the skills that you need to be a wife and mother.
And I think that the final words are so powerful of the novel, where she says, "Yeth," and her list comes back. And what's interesting is in the manuscript, Montgomery wrote yes with an S and then crossed it out and wrote Yeth. So it was very deliberate for her to make that not just an affirmation, but also maybe a regression or something. And
a return to pre-war Rilla, a return to like her younger self in a way.
I guess, or
the girl,
maybe more childlike, but also, you know, that leadership that she's been developing maybe is gone, you know, because Kenneth has come back and we know it's going to be happily ever after for them. Montgomery, as she always does, makes us question that a little bit. Yeah. Will it be happily ever after?
Right. Well, it makes me think a little bit of, and this is what happened after World War II, and we're still wrestling with this, right? Which is this idea of women really stepping up to fill all these factory jobs and do all these hard things. And then the men coming home and this, like, you have to get back in the kitchen, right? We have to leave the men jobs to the men so that they feel good after the war. And all of those new skills that you learned, all of this hardiness that you got to experience, you don't get to keep it. You are only borrowing it to begin with.
Yeah, and it was even more intense, I think, in the First World War to some degree. Studies have shown that the number of women who were in the workforce was less after the First World War than before the First World War. So
really,
the discourse to get them back into the kitchen was really, really powerful. And of course, you know, there was a whole discourse about lesbianism that rose up at the time that helped get the women to scurry back into the kitchen too. You know, women who wanted to work were pathological.
Mannish, you know.
Yes. all of that. So I mean, one of the questions for me about Rilla, I'm kind of on the fence about it. I mean, I love it. Who doesn't love the novel? And Rilla is such an interesting character. She's kind of like Emma, Jane Austen's Emma. She's preposterous at times, but you just can't help but love her. You know, one of my things about Rilla is it feminist? I mean, in some ways it is, and I always argue that it is, because it's centering women, it's revaluing women who have been devalued in our society, it's showing women's heroism, it's valuing the domestic sphere, all of those things. And yet at the same time, it's keeping women tied to that domestic sphere. So I just, it's such an interesting sort of question to ponder. Feminists are part of the backlash, you know, like this is the future. And we're so happy that we have these strong women who are going to be mothers and give birth to the next generation. Yay. But it seems like that this message is, this is where Rilla should be, even though she hates it.
I want us to transition into talking about raising our war baby Jims, because that is something that I really tuned into, was this tension that's happening between Rilla at the beginning of the book saying she doesn't like babies. Her mom and her sisters think she's unnatural for not liking babies. She ends up, as we know, adopting Jims or raising Jims for the course of the war. And one of the things I really noticed was this gradual move for Rilla into finding this maternity towards Jims. I want us to talk about the specifics of it, but I have like these kind of conflicting feelings about Rilla and her feelings of maternity towards Jims, which I think is lovely. Like in and of themselves, it's lovely. But what is it saying about Rilla maturing and becoming more maternal when that's not something that she actually wanted? And if this is prep for her to become a mother herself, is that something that she really wants? We don't know. She never tells us whether or not she's interested in that herself. But I had some conflicting feelings about kind of like the way that everybody ends up praising Rilla for raising Jims. It's not that she shouldn't have done it, but it seems like it's, oh, finally she's becoming kind of maternal.
Her maternity becomes proof of her angelic goodness.
Right.
Yeah.
To remind readers, early in the war, Rilla's driving around collecting Red Cross donations. And when she stops by the Anderson house, she finds a dead Mrs. Anderson, a callous and drunk Mrs. Conover, and a screaming baby. Rilla has no interest in babies, and she felt like she was being quite heroic enough by driving around with this old borrowed pony to collect supplies. She was already envisioning her heroism moment before this. But then she hears the screaming baby. She goes in, and this is what we see. Quote, Rilla was silent, looking down at the crying baby. She had never encountered any of the tragedies of life before, and this one smote her to the core of her heart. The thought of the poor mother going down into the valley of the shadow alone, fretting about her baby, with no one near but this abominable old woman, hurt her terribly. What could she do now? She didn't know, but she must do something. She hated babies, but she simply could not go away and leave that poor little creature with Mrs. Conover. She made a sudden, desperate, impulsive resolution. So even in the moment she's making this good decision, we are reminded that she hates babies. She doesn't even really want to touch him. She's never touched a baby before. And she manages to get him into the soup tureen, take him home. And of course, as we discussed last week, Gilbert tells Rilla that if the baby is to stay at Ingleside, either in the short term or the longer term, it's got to be Rilla's responsibility. And we know Gilbert wants to see if Rilla steps up, and this is challenging her directly to move past her self-centeredness and to apply herself to the hard work of making a difference. And if she does this, taking care of a baby is going to require real sacrifices from Rilla. Sleep, time, carefree youth. And does she have it in her if she's not even generally disposed to like babies? Can she put aside her own preferences? So this is interesting because now, especially that we just talked about it, what is Gilbert telling Rilla about not just being good and not being selfish and being responsible, which I think are morally generally a good thing, but about the specific ways that she should be responsible?
Talk about parentification. It's like quite literal here. It's a lot to put on a child herself to do this type of thing.
So why does she do it? Why do we think Rilla steps up besides the plot? Like she has to do this for the plot, but
Well, I think it's multiple. I mean, I think she did, have an emotional response to seeing this child in this horrible situation. But then I think there's a pressure, right? A pressure from the society at large. Everyone has to step up and do their duty. But then I think there's pressure from Gilbert and the notion that she wouldn't be able to do it. So she kind of has to prove herself, and it becomes like that.
Yeah, I really agree with you, Laura. And I see this as the two separate inflection points. And I think her motivation behind each is different, right? There's the first one in the moment where she has that sort of just like deep down knowing that like, oh no, this isn't okay. This isn't safe for the baby. This isn't a good situation for the baby. Like someone has to do something. And looking around the room, I'm the only one here kind of a moment. So that kind of makes sense. And I think when we're talking about goodness, that gives us a little bit of an insight into the fact that Rilla does have this like essential morality, right? And she does have an essential sense of responsibility. What she doesn't have, because she's 15, is foresight. So she brings the baby home being like, Mom and Dad, look what I got. And then when Gilbert does kind of challenge her and say, hey, we are all at our capacity here. None of us are going to raise an infant that you brought into the house. Like, you need to step up and do something about it. I think maybe there is maybe even a little shame that she was heedless in that moment and didn't think about all the work that everyone is already doing. But pride too, right? Like, I'm just going to do it. Said I was going to do it, so I'm going to follow through. It is admirable in the sense of what we've sort of been talking about, making these sacrifices for the war effort and doing your duty and doing what's honorable even when you don't want to. But I also think the conversation around, I'm sorry, Rilla's 15. What are we actually asking her to do here? I think that's an important one that we not lose sight of.
There's also such an interesting piece for Montgomery to take this opportunity to talk about war babies, which, there were, and, what do we do with them? And to put that war baby in the hands of a 15-year-old. I mean, it's just so fascinating to me how she's sort of upending things in such a funny way. It's a baby in a soup tureen. How can Rilla take this on? But she does.
She does, and we admire her for it, right? We're meant to admire her for it. We're meant to admire the ways that she grows around this. And I think we are also meant to see the sacrifice and the tragedy of her raising this child when she is so young still herself.
And I also think there's this piece of Rilla that is very 15 in this moment, which is I'll show you. I'm not even going to ask for help. Rilla kind of takes it almost to an extreme with this. I'm not going to ask for any help. I'm getting a book and I'm going to learn how to do this by myself. And I think that it just speaks a little bit to where she is developmentally and this enormous task in front of her.
Yeah, Rilla's own immaturity comes out with her like reliance on Morgan above all else, despite the fact she has 3 adults in her home who have raised half a dozen children amongst them. She's like, nope, the book is the most important thing.
So about a week in or so, Rilla is adjusting. The baby is doing better. Walter tells Rilla she has a lot of courage to tackle this enormous task, more than it would take Jem to face a mile of Germans. And Rilla writes, I wish I could like this baby a little bit. It would make things easier, but I don't. I've heard people say that when you took care of a baby, you got fond of it, but you don't. I don't anyway. And it's a nuisance. It interferes with everything. It just ties me down, which, look, fair.
She's not wrong. She's not wrong.
Newborns are a lot.
I once gave a paper, it was an academic paper, but it was to the general public at the Kingston Public Library in Ontario. And I was talking, I think it was probably that quotation, or I was just talking about how much Rilla despises gems. And at the end, it was a question from a friend of mine who actually is an academic, a mother of 2 boys. And she was very upset by the whole Jims thing. And she's such a compassionate, lovely person. And she just said, but what happened with the baby? Did she end up loving the baby? It hurts my heart that she didn't even like the baby.
That's fascinating. Okay, because again, therapist hat here. And I work with a lot of like pre and postpartum mothers. Like that's kind of ended up developing into a specialty. And one of the things that often is really hard for new moms is this newborn period is rough. Even if this is a baby that you deeply wanted, even if this is something you really want to love. And often there is this gap between this, I love my baby because this is my baby and I want to, but I'm not connected to the baby yet. I don't like doing this because a newborn is so all need, not that much reward yet. And then you've got this cultural pressure that you feel like there's something deeply wrong with you if you don't love your baby, if you're not over the moon. And
So I love that. Yeah. So I feel like that is so much of what Montgomery's doing, right?
Yeah.
She is showing that none of this is naturally tied to being a girl or a woman, that for so many women, they actually have to work at being domestic, goddesses and to look after children. And it's labor. And I think that that's what she keeps making central. And I think that's really important. It's not just some maternal instinct that takes over and you have to work at it. Love is even labor. I mean, it's just so interesting how she depicts this world and makes it okay. Like, puts the humor in and everything. But I think it's pretty much a scathing critique in some ways of what we expect, that angelically good, the duty that we expect of girls and women that has so little benefit to them or reward.
And in this case, not only does it have so little benefit and reward for Rilla, Jim's isn't hers. At the end of the war, she returns Jim's correctly, of course, like to his father. So all of this labor, all of this work that she did for this child, and for what? Not even the benefit of a relationship.
I was thinking about this, and Laura, you had mentioned, we were talking about like defining what angelic goodness is, similarly to how we defined cleverness. And that is much harder, I think, to define goodness. And I think what's interesting here is we've got Rilla wrestling with doing these things that she hates and is not naturally inclined to do. Just like we've got Walter wrestling with enlisting, and this is he's in moral agony. But you compare Walter to Jem, and we will definitely get into this as a whole separate episode, but compared to Jem, who signed, he didn't even think about signing up. It was practically instinct. He's like, I'm there, I got it, this is my heroic moment. It didn't even occur to him that he wouldn't enlist. And Maud seems much more interested in spending this time with the people who are wrestling with this kind of goodness, where it's not coming easy to them. It's not instinctual. And comparing it to, in Rilla's case, she often compares it to somebody like Una Meredith, probably also to Anne, to whom motherhood was very instinctual. And a lot of the angelic goodness was very instinctual. And we've got Walter compared to Jem, where Walter's decision to go is, could we say that it was braver, more good, that he truly understood the horror of war before he went and had wrestled with going, versus Jem, who kind of didn't super think it through and just was like,
called it the great game, right?
Right, exactly. This is going to be his grand adventure that he, as a young boy, when Walter had the premonition, Jem was like, yeah, I'm on it. Sign me up. Yeah. So it's interesting because I think Maud is spending so much more time in the heads of, with the people who are wrestling with being good, whatever the outcome of the goodness is, it's something they had to work for. Is that more good? Is Walter going more of a good than Jem going? Is that where Montgomery's coming from, do you think?
Don't you feel that? I mean, I do feel she is pointing out that goodness, and I think there's a tradition of it in girls' stories, but goodness is ponying up and doing the thing you don't want to do because it's your duty. And that's goodness, self-sacrifice. And for Walter, it's actual literal self-sacrifice. But I think there's a gender thing going on there, right? So Walter's duty, he resists it to the same degree that Rilla does, but they're both gendered. He's being forced to go off to war and kill people, which is completely morally abhorrent to him. And Rilla is, I don't know if it's morally abhorrent to raise babies, but she is being forced to sew and do all these things and knit that she absolutely, and cook, I mean, and she's doing it, but she does not love it. And I think Montgomery is saying that's where goodness lies in that moment.
And it becomes that sort of connection to her inherent motherhood, or at least her understanding of Jim's particularly, and that sort of blending the scientific and the, instinctual or emotional, that then becomes like further evidence of her goodness, right? Further evidence of her moral development and her moral growth over the course of the book. Yeah, it's a really, really interesting thing here with the baby.
Well, and what's interesting, of course, is that if we uncoupled it from parenting from the maternity piece, and instead the bigger issue of learning how to understand your own instincts, learning when you need help and when to trust yourself, and taking information in and then thinking critically. Like, overall, that is a good maturity piece. The fact that it's specific here around mothering, it's giving a narrower message than it has to.
It's all in the service of Kenneth, right? So he comes back, and we know the happy ending is they will get married because Rilla is set up now to be the best mother and wife because of all that she's been through. And it just seems to me that it's such an interesting, deflating kind of ending here. She's been schooled. Wartime has schooled her to take this on in later life. So it's all about Kenneth ultimately, because she's the prize for him. I had an MA student when I was at the Royal Military College of Canada, and she did her master's in war studies on Montgomery's Rilla of Ingleside and the First World War, and it was called Women Worth Fighting For. And that's a quotation from Montgomery's journal, where she's looking at the women she's working with in the Red Cross and going, are these the women who are worth fighting for? Because they were all, squabbling amongst themselves.
Oh, that's the opposite.
Oh,
right?
yes. Okay, so
And
that's what's going on. Yep.
Yeah, and so I think what she's is showing, this is why I'm always on the fence with Rilla. On one hand, I see it as so feminist. There's Susan Baker. There's all this stuff happening. And yet on the other side, she's showing that the men are going to come back, and then these women are going to be the next generation wives and mothers, and they are schooled in it now, and they will be so good. They are the women worth fighting for, and this is your big reward, which I think is just really
The men's reward for coming back from war are these women who are honed against the crucible of war to be the best possible wives and mothers they could possibly be, which is bonkers, right? That's bonkers.
Well, it goes with like all these messages we have about the importance for the girls to, like, Rilla's pressure to give Fred Arnold a kiss, right? So he has something to kind of fight for. Walter says something about how it's not too hard to fight and die for a country that produces women like Rilla and Una. And Kenneth, right? Like, he's sitting there on the porch watching Rilla and Jim's and thinking, this is the image I'm going to take with me into war, because this is what I'm fighting to protect.
Comparing her very specifically to the Virgin Mary, right? Talk about angelically good. And that's all one in his mind. And this is when he falls for Rilla.
And she is the Virgin Mary in some ways, right?
She literally is, right?
She's a mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want us to give us time to see if we can get in this one, like, third event that sort of follows Rilla throughout the course of the book and weirdly exemplifies, like, her growth, which it sounds like it's a silly, funny moment, but I think there's something profound happening with it, which is Rilla and her green velvet hat. So early on in the war, Rilla gets to go to town. Reportedly, this is the first time she gets to buy her own winter hat or make a more significant, like, wardrobe purchase without her mother. And she's actually feeling that. She says, I felt that mother had really given up thinking of me as a child, because she gets to go have this moment of independence. And as most of us have this experience when we are teenagers, with this independence, she has not found the balance between price and fashion. She finds the most beautiful green hat, but she pays a lot for it. She gets it home, realizes both that she spent too much money and that the hat is maybe too fancy for her current lifestyle. She's not going to parties. Everybody's sticking around pretty close to home. And gently points out that perhaps this was too much money to spend for a hat. And did Rilla think about that, particularly when the need of the world is much greater? Rilla is 15. She justifies it, saying, well, she paid for it out of her own allowance. Seriously, you could change the details. This could be a fight I will have with my kid next year. I'm pretty sure. She paid for it out of her own allowance and reminds her that they're trusting her to spend her allowance wisely. She spends too much on one thing, she won't be able to afford other things. And again, being 15, Rilla reacts by doubling down with anger. And in her diary, she could admit that she was uncomfortable because she knows that Anne is right. And there's this stubbornness again. She vows to wear this hat for 3 years or the duration of the war, whichever is longer. And she knows that Anne does not think she's going to make it that long, but she's stubborn and she's going to prove her wrong. And this is set up as kind of like a funny moment of showing us like Rilla's vanity and self-centeredness in the moment. But one of the things I really love about this incident is, again, how pitch perfect 15 this is. Mm-hmm. And without the background of war to make this higher stakes, this is the kind of low stakes screwing up that we want teenagers to have, right? They should always have the chance to like spend too much money on something, kind of regret it, because that's how you learn in the future, how to manage your money, how to think ahead about cost per wear, those types of things, right? That's a really age appropriate experience. It's only significant because it's in this backdrop of war and it's this expectation, not just that she shouldn't spend her own allowance too frivolously, but that she needs to be thinking of what's happening in the war. And she needs to be realizing that there are Belgians dying in Europe. And should she really be spending this much for a hat? That's a lot of burden to put on like a stupid purchase.
Right. It's not just, oh, you spent all your allowance on this silly thing. Now you're going to have to deal with not having any more allowance money and having to wear this hat. That is, like you say, a very age appropriate lesson for a 15-year-old. But then it's the idea that's like, oh, because you did this, it's almost like you took a potential source of aid or a potential source of support away from people who are in dire need. And like, that is a whole like way to spin this, right? What could just be sort of an average lesson about managing your money and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's intense.
It's kind of a humiliation, isn't it?
I think it
like
is.
Montgomery leading her into this, and then a self-humiliation. Like at first it's her anger maybe leads her into this, but by swearing she's going to wear it right to the end. And it's a very visible, I imagine green velvet would stick out. It's not like gray wool. You can see that velvet would be a pretty fancy hat. And green, I imagine, just would stick out at the time. So it's interesting what Rilla has to go to reach the happy ending. The kinds of humiliations, the kinds of duties that she despises. And I think the hat, which is delightful and super funny, but it's just another one of them, right? And constantly visible signifier of the humiliation the things she has to learn. But it's humiliating. Every time she puts that hat on, it has to be humiliating.
You think about what this must have looked like in 1918 as opposed to like 1915, right? By this time in the war, I'm guessing nobody is getting new clothes. Everybody is wearing dresses and things that are worn out. And here's Rilla going to these benefit concerts or canvassing for victory loans wearing this appalling hat, right? This far too fancy for her circumstances hat. And yeah, that is, I didn't think about it that way, Laura, but that is like a form of humiliation that she has to live with.
Partly she does this to herself. Anne at no point says she can't have another winter hat. In fact,
I know they would have bought her another winter hat, right?
I think they've encouraged her too, that like, you can have another winter hat. And she's stubborn and she's like, absolutely not. I said I would wear it till the end of the war and I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
But I think just that idea that this is much bigger stakes to a really small kind of mess up that most teenagers have. Anne at 15 absolutely would have done this. I mean, and Marilla would have been like, I mean, think about it. Puff sleeves, those are ridiculous. That's an impractical use of fabric. And she didn't even have the background of war.
So in some ways, good for Rilla for sticking to her guns, so to speak. It's almost like she turns the tables on the humiliation then. She's like, no, I'm seeing this one out. Like, Anne apologizing to Mrs. Lynde, she's going whole hog.
Right. If you're going to do a thing, do it thoroughly.
Yeah.
When the war finally ends and the news of the armistice comes, the first thing that Rilla does is kick this hat to pieces. We get this little scene. You've certainly kept your vow pluckily, laughed Miss Oliver. It wasn't pluck. It was sheer obstinacy. I'm rather ashamed of it, said Rilla, kicking joyously. I just wanted to show Mother. It's mean to want to show your own mother. Most unfilial conduct. But I have shown her, and I've shown myself a few things. So, actually, right, this hat incident it's proof of kind of how Rilla has moved through vanity. This is her working through her own vanity towards something that's a little less frivolous, but it's also proof of her stubbornness and being obstinate. So when she says, I've shown myself a few things, what do you think Rilla has shown herself? Like, I'm curious what she's thinking she took out of this. Is it that she's got a deeper well for pettiness than she thought she did?
Well, I think in fact she does have vanity still, because it's just different. It's not vanity about her appearance anymore. It's vanity about her stick-to-itiveness, right? She's going to show her mother. She's going to prove herself that she can stick to continuing to wear this hat. So it's a different kind of vanity. You know, it's about I am whatever.
I have substance.
Yes.
I'm more than you
yes.
think I am. There's
I
more
am
to me
more
than
than
meets
you. Yeah, I am more than you think I am. That's it. Yeah.
And it comes right back to her vow about gyms, and even with the Red Cross, where I'm going to stick through to these things that people thought I couldn't do.
That I thought I couldn't do.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's even the biggest one. So kind of like wrapping up our arc on Rilla and goodness, we've touched on this a few times, but it seems like it keeps on coming back to this idea of sacrifice, right? Yeah. That Rilla is constantly in these situations where she has to sacrifice her own wants for the greater good. Like, it's funny when it's the green hat, but that's just a metaphor for the bigger sacrifices that war has asked for Rilla, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think these sacrifices, we've talked all about how for her, none of this is coming easy, right? She really has to dig deep. She has to find a well of sort of moral capacity that she didn't know she had, that quite frankly, because of where she starts in this book as the youngest in the family, being beautiful and petted and despoiled and all the things that they say about her, you know, that quite frankly, no one expected her to have, that no one asked her to have, that she wasn't required to have ever growing up. And all of a sudden, there they are. There's all of these character traits about having determination and perseverance and grit and see through it. And her growth arc here, I think, is astonishing.
The backdrop of war makes Rilla's maturity, like, it gives it high stakes in a way. But there's a version of Rilla that could have experienced the war and didn't have to become a heroine. She could have stayed like Irene. She could have been petty and vindictive in the Red Cross. She could have let it be a social club. She could have given gyms back to the orphanage. She even could have bought another hat. At any of those turns, Rilla could have made a different choice, and she didn't. Like, she did the hard thing.
I love talking to the two of you because I'm now seeing Rilla differently yet again. And in this case, because she is taken lightly, everyone sort of looks down on her at the beginning. They see her as light and fluffy, you know, the whole 9 yards. No one expects her to be able to do anything. If there wasn't a war, what would have happened to Rilla? Because she wasn't allowed to develop. They were going to keep her in that little box. But suddenly a war comes and they're way too busy to fuss with her. And sure, they encourage her to do things, but she really steps up. So it's like the constraints that were going to keep her in this role of being a lighthearted, frippity heroine are gone. And now she can take it on like a general and do all of the things. So I love it. I'm now seeing it completely differently again, except for that last word. Yeah.
I was going to say, but Laura, to go back to your question of, is this a feminist book? What is happening here? She gets let out of the box. She's allowed to bloom and expand and become the battlefield general and the leader of the Junior Reds and do all the things. To what end? To Yeth.
The happy ending is her having babies, and we're still not entirely convinced that she loves babies now. I mean, we know she can raise a baby, but did she ever love gyms at the end? I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced. But all the things, I mean, she took it all on, but she never developed a love for any of it.
And if she did love gyms, she loved gyms specifically, right? Mm-hmm. Like this specific baby, because she's worked so hard and gotten a chance to reap some of the rewards that of the relationship as he gets older and he attaches to her. Like that's emotionally rewarding often for many people. It's not like that she had some sort of change of heart where she was like, I love babies and I can't wait.
Right. I love all babies now. Yeah.
Right.
So I see Rilla, the novel, as Maud's attempt to concoct goodness out of such a nihilistic and devastating war. And it really was, and she felt it really deeply. So she has to show that there was some good that came out of it. So Rilla and all the other hardworking young women, maybe not Irene, who sacrificed at home. And most importantly, though, as I've said, life goes back to normal for the boys, even though they come back changed or harmed in some ways, but it's still, they're not going to have to continue to fight in a war. But Rilla's domestic labor, and let's be clear, for which she has no desire or aptitude, is going to carry on. So the war does not end for Rilla.
We're going to roll this kind of into our birch path, because what you said about Maud's attempt to concoct goodness out of this devastating war, that's a perspective we don't have. We don't have the deep lore on her journals at the time and her experience, Maud's experience of World War I, that obviously influenced her writing of this book and writing of other books. So we would love it if you could share more context about that for Rilla of Ingleside.
Absolutely. So, I mean, what's interesting is that in her journals, there are passages that are almost identical to passages in Rilla of Ingleside about the war and about her feelings about the war. But we all know that she rewrote her journals, right? So we don't know to what degree she lifted them to put in her novel, or to what degree she may have, when she wrote them, to be similar to her novel.
Which did she steal from? Did she steal from her novel to put in her journals, or from her journals to put in her novel?
We will never know the answer to that question. But because she rewrote her journals and kept revising and revising them, we just don't know for sure that the journals is where it was written first, and then she put it in. So it's fascinating. But she does talk about the war and tracks it. And it's really, and remember, she's rewriting it too after the fact. But she details her time in Leaskdale, Ontario, which is where she was during the war, and the heartbreak of being a minister's wife. So, you know, they rallied the troops in the same way that Rilla does. They encouraged them to join up, and then they had to go minister to the families when the boys came home in caskets, and so many of them did, and boys that they knew well. And I'm saying boys, young men, but boys too. And I think one of the big moments for her was, there was a lieutenant colonel, Sam Sharp, who was from Zephyr, which would also Ewan, her husband, ministered in Zephyr and Leasdale, connected to Uxbridge. He had been a member of Parliament in Canada, and then he had been in the military when he was a younger man, but he was convinced to join up again during the war and set up a battalion in the Leaskdale, Uxbridge area. So he did, and of course, you know, led them all off to war. It was quite exciting, the march through Uxbridge and Leaskdale, and then boys died. And he had a mental breakdown and was sent home to Canada, and he was in Montreal en route back to his wife in Zephyr, and he committed suicide. And it affected the community intensely, and it affected Montgomery intensely. So I think when she's sitting down to write Rilla of Ingleside, all of that's there. I mean, she's gone through the whole process of, this will be a short war, this will be, you know, it won't be that devastating, I'll rally the troops because we all have to do our duty. And then just seeing the devastation and not understanding the reason for it. I think most people just didn't understand why it even happened.
Why the war happened, why the war was as incredibly violent and bloody, and why so many lives were lost, why it lasted as long as it did, all of the above.
And the type of war it was too, right? So for the first time we had trench warfare, which is horrific. There was chemical warfare for the first time. Like, it was just war in a different and an incomprehensible way. It wasn't what Jem thought, you know, who probably had grown up with Boer War stories. It's not the same. It was not glorious in any way. It was not heroic in the same way that other wars had been perceived to be. And it was just the numbers of the dead were huge, and we hadn't seen numbers in that high in the past. So everything changed with the First World War. I mean, wars were perceived suddenly really differently. So, and I think she's reflecting all of this in Rilla of Ingleside, but she's actually showing the trajectory, which is interesting. She's not just sort of starting at the end point, which that was awful. Why did it happen? But I think the Miss Oliver character is so interesting, because I think we have Montgomery's words in her mouth, according to her journals, the dreams, all of that kind of stuff. I feel that it's all so connected to where Montgomery herself, like the position that she had throughout the war. But she still had to go rally troops. And I mean, it's just really fascinating what she went through as a minister's wife. And the Red Cross, always the Red Cross. There's so much Red Cross work that she did. And the women who fought were infighting, and the things that were happening. And, she, like Rilla, had to sort of mediate all of that.
Maud doesn't really get into this in any specific way in Rilla of Ingleside, but I thought about it as a reader. We have this passage where Rilla is doing a recitation, doing a patriotic recitation, and urging the young men to enlist. And then in the same book, mere pages later, she's agonizing about Walter enlisting and how worried she is for her brothers and for Kenneth and for her childhood playmates and all of that. And it's like, I think that duality is in the book. It exists in the book, but it's not pushed up against each other in any kind of a way that would really make the audience like wrestle with it, like unless they were doing a really deep read. I wonder if she wanted to have it both ways, because that was part of her lived experience, right? She wanted to write the patriotic book, but she also wanted to be real about how painful and what a sacrifice it was. But not necessarily maybe the feelings of guilt or responsibility that she may have wrestled with for being part of the force that sent those young men to war.
Yeah, I mean, I think she encodes things in ways, so she gets it in. I think when Rilla first came out, everyone thought it was a very patriotic, almost jingoistic novel. But she's trying to wrest something positive from it.
Yeah.
Because she gives us happy endings. That's what she does. But as I say about every single one of her novels, she discomfits us in the same moment that she hands us the happy ending, right? She leaves us kind of a little uncertain about it. Like, yay, we got it. We got our happy ending. We can all walk away from feel good. But we're kind of like, but really it worked out that perfectly? Or yeah.
Right. Kenneth comes home from war and he just has like a scar that makes him more handsome. But then you get that Yeth, which is a little bone chilling.
It is. Yeah. It just, I mean, it could be cute, like, oh, she's so nervous that she's regressed to her childhood lisp. But I think we can just see that in so many other ways too. And Montgomery would have been fully aware of that. I mean, she was first and foremost an incredible artist and very in control of her craft.
Yes. Well, we should probably start winding up, because we could obviously do this all day.
I know.
But
we don't have things must come to an end.
All good things must come to an end.
Including this episode with Dr. Laura Robinson. Laura, it has been so wonderful having you here with us. We love to wind up our episodes with a segment that we call Inspired by Anne. So, Laura, what are you inspired by?
So I love the moment where Susan Baker is complaining that how is she supposed to make a cake without eggs and flour and all of that kind of stuff. And then when I was doing research for my exhibit, I came across an ad for Canada's War Cake in the Red Cross Bulletin from December 1915.
Nice.
And so what the Red Cross did was they sold this recipe, made women swear to secrecy in order to raise funds. And it turns out, so my family tradition is at Christmas time, we have Wartime Cake, War Cake, and it's a beautiful, dense cake with dates and raisins and lots of spices in it. And we loved it at Christmas. This is, for me, I don't love sweets, but this doesn't feel sweet to me. It feels more like that spicy flavor, cinnamon, ginger, allspice, you know the ones. So I always make it. My mom died years ago, so I've carried on a tradition of making war cake. And I just think it's funny. It's the same. I found the recipe for the Canada's War Cake, and it's basically that's what it is. So
your family tradition was actually the war cake.
Yes, and it came out of probably the first one, which is, I always wondered why we called it war cake at Christmas time. It seems a strange thing to eat,
Yeah.
but there you go. That's why.
Well,
Yes.
Laura, can we put your recipe for war cake in our show notes? So if folks would like to make their own war cake.
Yes, and I've modified it slightly because my mother sometimes wrote crazy recipes where she put like a half a cup of pepper, and what she meant was a half a teaspoon of pepper, but my mother was not one for the details. So yes, that's it. But it
Well,
comes from generations. So it came from that First World War, I'm sure. And it's just been part of our family tradition ever since.
that is amazing. We are going to put it in our show notes. So if you want to make your own war cake, folks, please, please do. And think of Susan Baker.
Yes.
Think of Susan Baker and Rilla learning how to bake and sending off treats to the boys at the war.
Kelly, are you inspired by anything?
I'm very inspired by Rilla and the Junior Reds and all of Rilla's community building. I have been thinking so much about this in the past few years, as we continue to live in unprecedented times. Building community feels more and more important every day. Our information landscape is so divided, and it really just strikes me that the thing that we all really need to be doing is making friends and having people over for coffee and just talking to each other. And maybe that is like overly simple given the grand scale of problems that we feel like we're facing, but I don't think you can hate someone or minimize their humanity or their value if you've sat in their living room and had coffee with them, if you've eaten their potato salad at the potluck, if you fed their cat while they're out of town, if you've done any of these things with the people who you are truly in community with. And I'm not talking about just your friends, the people you agree with. I'm talking about people who you might not necessarily agree with. You can't hate someone or deny their humanity if you are truly part of a community with them. So we have to be able to keep talking to real people in real spaces, whether that's in living rooms or around dinner tables or at the dog park or in line at the supermarket. We have to be making and sustaining the communities that are going to show up for us and support us. I'm inspired by Rilla. I too am going to be brave and unselfish and a heroine, and I'm going to work on saying hello to all of my neighbors.
Love it.
And, instead of just sort of like nodding and scurrying along when I'm walking my dogs, but, really trying to find common ground and, getting to know the people who live around us, because I really think that's the only thing that's going to save us.
Oh, I love that, Kel. Well, I am very inspired by Rilla, who finds small, concrete ways to do good in the face of huge world-shaking horror, because I think that is how we unparalyze ourselves. And it is tempting to think that what we do doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. But again, like you, I think that it's the small little things that start adding up and allow space for the big changes. For me, and this is just top of mind because it's what I'm doing right now, but one of the things that has kept me sane in the last God knows how many unprecedented years, is fostering kittens with the ASPCA. And it's not a big grand gesture, and I'm not confusing it with folks who are doing the hard, brave work on the front lines of the various crises, but saving a few tiny lives every year pulls me away from the doom scrolling nature of just consuming bad news and feeling like that's doing something. It reminds me I can make a difference too. And I get to cuddle kittens, and that is scientifically proven to be healing. So I've been fostering through our local ASPCA for about 6 years, off and on when I have the time and energy. So if you're in Los Angeles, the ASPCA here in Los Angeles makes it so easy, but I am sure wherever you are, there is a local animal rescue or humane society that would love to have more fosters for kittens or dogs or the animals of your choice. Right now, I've got 3 tuxedo kittens, and they are really fun and really cute. But if animals aren't your thing, find some other small, concrete way to make the world a little bit better.
Well, and the fun side effect of having a friend who fosters kittens is that you get to also hold them and play with them and cuddle them. Laura Robinson, thank you so much for joining us today. What an absolute pleasure. This conversation, as long as it is, could have been probably 2 hours longer without any of us breaking a sweat.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, honestly, it's just joyousness to speak to the two of you.
Oh, thank you.
We feel the same way. Thank you so much for listening, Kindred Spirits. It means the absolute world. If you want to know anything else about what Laura is working on, you can find her online at
the Ellen Montgomery Institute at UPEI. Come check out. We have a brand new website. It's really beautiful. So come check it out. mmontgomery.ca.
And we'll put that link in our show notes as well.
The Ellen Montgomery Institute has been such an incredible resource for me and Reagan. That's one of our first stops whenever we're starting to think about like the shape of the season and topics we want to talk about. And if you all kindred spirits haven't been checking it out, I hope that you do. It is phenomenal, the work that has gone into Ellen Montgomery scholarship over the years, and it is all right there.
And Kindred Spirits, if you would like to help more Kindred Spirits find the podcast, the very best way to do that is to leave us a 5-star rating and a kind review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, or wherever you listen. Or you can spread the word on social media. That helps too. Don't forget, if you send us proof that you did that at kindredspirits.bookclub@gmail.com, we will mail you one of our lovely sage green, beautiful Kindred Spirits Book Club stickers. That's your membership badge. So join us next episode as we continue to explore more of Rilla of Ingleside. There are so many depths for us to plumb, you guys. We've got so much more to talk about, so stay tuned. Thanks for listening, Kindred Spirits.
Thank you and goodbye.